Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I talk about four different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health freedom. And in that light, I'm always interviewing entrepreneurs, influencers, creators on the cutting edge, changing the world. So today we have Watson Jordan, and he's actually very interesting. He's the founder of the Resilience Initiative, which is going to be a really big topic today. He's also an educator and author. And so today we're going to be talking about clarity. We're going to talk about resilience, emotional resilience, life strategies, and thriving in today's world. So with that, I'll introduce Watson and bring him onto the show. Welcome, Watson.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to talk about resilience and freedom. So I'm all for that.
I'm saying I think resilience is the word these days with just so much chaos and upheaval. But I'm happy to have you on the show and tell us more about your story, and we'll go more into it.
Good. So my story with the Resilience Initiative is I had followed a pretty traditional path. I'd worked in education at a school, at an educational nonprofit. I had sold financial products to schools. I developed financial products for associates. And I reached this point where I had a moment to stop and look around. And I went, I feel good about what I've done. I don't wish I'd done something differently, but I felt really called to take a turn towards a more impactful future on people. So a lot of it has to do with my first book. My wife and I lost a son a little over 20 years ago. In the process of going through that loss, putting our life back together, I noticed that the bookshelf for fathers or men grieving a significant loss written by men was almost empty. I mean, there are 1,000 books by women about how men should grieve, about how couples should grieve, about how women, thousands, and 3 by men. So I really felt called to share just my experience. Like most things that you're called for, it took a while, and I'm able to write. And I don't know how much writing you've done, but if any of your listeners have done any writing, it is hard work. Writing is hard. It's really difficult. I was doing that. I was working on that book, and a friend of mine, Diana Wu Davis, had just launched her initial cohort based on her Future Proof book, which is about taking a look at your life and through finding out what options are there and going in a unique direction. So I took her class and I founded the Resilience Initiative, and I've been promoting resilience around the world since then.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful story. So we'll get clear into it. It's all about resilience. We'll just talk about, with the pandemic, you have this main idea where you talk about resilience in the pandemic and kind of like a WTF moment. What just happened? Tell us, elaborate on that.
with the pandemic. So I had released my first book. I was planning this fantastic global speaking tour, and then the pandemic came, and that all went away. So I was doing a good amount of work facilitating online discussions, and I found I started to have a few ideas that would turn into essays. So, but it didn't take long, because one of the lessons of the pandemic for me was that the last thing the world needs is 25 essays from one person. What the world really wants and benefits from, in this case, is 20 essays from different people around the world. So the topic and the prompt was resilient, how the pandemic taught us to be wiser and stronger. So that was the prompt that I sent out. So I am lucky. I belong to a few global communities, and I sent out kind of invitations to write an essay to about 40 people, specifically men and women, different ages, different countries, different religions. I tried to get as much perspective as I could, and I ended up with 20 great essays. Resilience in the pandemic, post-pandemic time. So, and that drove the Resilience Initiative. We have a 5-3-1 plan for fortifying your resilience.
What one thing I'm curious because a lot of people resilience is kind of a buzzword today. I'm curious. A lot of people are interested in the intersection of resilience and identifying your core beliefs and getting clarity on why we do what we do. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. And I do a good amount of work in and around those areas. So I'll start with the basics of kind of my resilience work, and then I'll look at why, and I'll look at purpose and a few of those pieces. I'm really out to help people fortify their resilience around the world. But I'm not, there are all sorts of different definitions of resilience. And one would be kind of like Ernest Shackleton, the famous explorer who got stranded on the South Pole and rowed a rowboat to South America and saved I mean, it's just unbelievable kind of cover of Time magazine types story that just certainly displayed remarkable resilience. That's not what I'm out to do. What I'm out to do is to go, there are fundamentals to building and maintaining a resilient foundation that serve everyone well, that are very achievable, that are not cover of Time magazines, and they revolve around, you need to have 5 people in your inner circle, and you need to be glad that they're there. You need to belong to 3 communities that you invest in and harvest from, not that you lead. So 5 people in your inner circle, 3 communities, and you need to have one core belief. And that core belief in my building foundation around the world, it's not critical what it is. There's not a best answer for a core belief, but there's a meaningful core belief for each person. And that's not compared to, if you had to rank them in ease, 5 people, 3 communities, one core belief. Well, the one core belief, that's a much harder question to answer. It takes some real thought. So there's not a magic way to do that, to derive that answer of what's your core belief. What I encourage people to do is to identify 3 people that you admire and ask them about their core belief. They may not know what it is, but I promise that conversation will help move you forward in terms of identifying a core belief. But it's really just something that we can depend on.
Yeah, it's very insightful when you talk about this, 5-3-1 type thing. And then I'm really interested in the value of community. So when you talk about community, very curious to hear your thoughts on, the power of community.
I'll start with, I've done a little writing on this. So the question is, where does hope live? Which I think is a fun question. Because people kind of go, would you like some hope? And everyone raises their hand. Yes, I'd like some hope. Well, hope lives in community. And if there's anything that the pandemic taught us, it's that gathering is powerfully affirming for humans. And gathering virtually is better than isolating. Gathering in person is different than gathering virtually. And I think that's the first type of community I'd like to belong to. But I also have found that there are communities that are virtual that are unbelievably rich because they're virtual. So anyone from around the world can join them. And kind of the 2 that I mentioned are, again, the Future Proof group that my friend Diana Wu David started is a community.
Mm-hmm.
I also belong to a fitness community called Kenzai that a former student started about a decade ago. And it was great during the pandemic because it's always been virtual. So it didn't miss a beat. So those interactions were very powerful for me during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But gathering in person is tremendously fortifying. And I go to yoga. I go to hot yoga Asheville. If you're
Mm-hmm.
ever in Asheville, hit me up. I'm glad to give you a buddy pass. But at yoga, like any community, we get to see people doing things that we'd like to do. And it's inspirational. So I like to do a handstand. So I didn't know how to do it, but I saw people at yoga do it. And I went, well, I bet if I asked them, they would tell me what the first thing they did. And that, in fact, as an educator, that's a learning style. It's called novice to expert, where you just ask someone who you know has done what you want to do. And that's what we see in communities, because that's where hope lives. And we get to go and participate. And there's something that happens when we're together with like-minded people that's fortifying. It's kind of calming inside for our soul.
And the thing is, like these communities. So, for example, like yoga, or you have like Burning Man, and just people coming together. South by Southwest, which is really very powerful. And then there's a book I think was really interesting, was The Power of Gathering, that came out. I'm not sure if it was written before, but it was very promoted after the pandemic. Just the power of community, and we need people. And then so you have this foundation in resilience, and how it guides you in your team training, speaking, and books. And a lot of listeners out there are interested in checking out your book. And tell us more about what the book entails, and kind of give us a synopsis of it.
Well, there are two books, but I want to jump back to one thing. So there are big, significant, powerful communities. I think any community is fine. If you like bowling, I think a bowling league is a fine community. I think just leaving where we are, getting together, doing something, there's something in that motion of coming together that's very powerful. And I think we get to pick whatever resonates with us. So, and in my kind of foundational work, that's the whole idea. It's, I just need to find places where I feel like I fit, where I can bring something to the table. I also take something away. But you ask about my books, and anyone who's written a book that's a great question. So my first book is Mine, Ours, and Yours, A Father's Journey Through the Life and Death of a Child. So that's about our son, William. And there was a movie called Yours, Mine, and Ours about a family that came together. And I liked that as a word play, but it was a little differently, because with grief in a marriage, there was my grief, there's my wife's grief, and there's ours as a couple. And that's in the book. I go to great lengths to describe it, and it's a mess. It is a mess because it is just there's no quick solution. So, but in the book, I talk about our life with William, his tragic death, and our life after. And what started as most people, if they live long enough, have something horrible happen to them or close to them. So there's a moment where you go thinking, why did this happen to me? And then there's an emergent moment where we take a step back towards society, back towards our friends, towards the communities that we're in. So I talk about that at length. And you mentioned earlier purpose, about why do we do what we do. And I had a moment. William had been dead a couple of years, and I was running at the track at the school I worked at. And my experience with great ideas is I've never sat at my desk and written great idea at the top of a piece of paper and a great idea came. That's never happened to me. I've never talked to anyone that that's happened to. Most of my better ideas happen when I'm doing something, when I'm running at the track or on a walk. So I was running at the track and I had the thought, William just never got to have the life that he might have. But if I could help someone else have a life they never would have, that felt right to me. That was very liberating. So I went, well, I got to figure out how to do that. So we founded a triathlon that became a fundraiser for a scholarship in William's name. I ran into a group that was building a schoolhouse in Africa, and we did some fundraising to help build that schoolhouse. It's the path from that type of tragedy, a life of hope and action. So that's the story, and the details are in the book. And
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Yeah, that's a wonderful synopsis and intro, and I encourage all the listeners out there to check out Watson's book. And it's been a fantastic interview. Lastly, a lot of the listeners, how can they reach out to you, follow you, and contact you?
The easiest way to get in touch with me is my website, which is at #resilient. So that's all one word. So the word hash. There are easy ways to schedule some time with me. There's information about the books and the work that I do. So that's the best way to get in touch with me. Thank you for asking.
And for all the listeners out there, Watson's resources will be in the links and show notes. This was a great interview. Be sure to check him out, his website as well, his books as well. And all of those links will be in the show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the show and talking about the Resilience Initiative.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.